Evening, everyone. Welcome here in this space. Welcome at home. My name is Shivant Jagru, and I will be your moderator for today. And this evening will be a conversation about climate racism and climate justice. And this event tonight it's developed in collaboration with Greenpeace, and it's part of the series called Together Against Racism, or in Dutch, Samen tegen Racisme. And in this evening we explore and we discuss together how the current climate catastrophe is connected to colonialism, and in particular Dutch colonialism. We know there is systemic racism in the Netherlands, in education, in housing, when doing your taxes, and paying your taxes, but systemic racism is also related to ecological concerns. So today we zoom in on this link, the link between systemic racism and colonialism on the one hand, and environmental concerns and climate justice on the other hand. And these issues are never actually separated. But too often they are addressed and discussed as relatively different topics. Malcolm Ferdinand suggests to us that we need to think about environmentalism, racism, and colonialism as interwoven. And for example, take the heat waves and the floods of 22. They were portrayed in the media, also here in the Netherlands, as though the climate emergency was finally here. It finally reached us, that is, white Europeans. However, why is there so much public attention when climate catastrophe impacts white middle-class lives? And why are communities of color worldwide affected disproportionately, even though they did not cause climate change? The ecological crisis is also not new. It has been here for centuries. Colonial powers have plundered the planet, and yes, for those who are still in doubt, this includes the Netherlands. Ecosystems were destroyed for plantation economies. Black and brown bodies were subjugated for free and cheap labor. Subjugating people of color and subjugating nature goes hand in hand. And Dutch colonial legacies are still with us today, and they need to be addressed head on. So how to deal with colonial harm done in the past? And how to deal with it in former Dutch colonies, and how to deal with it here. What are steps we can take to think about it differently? So today we have some amazing speakers, and I'm really happy to have them together in this conversation space. And this evening we have kind of clustered in two sections. First, we will explore the problem, especially the problem of climate racism. So what is climate racism, and how does colonial history impact the environment, impact society still today? And we'll zoom in on Curaçao and West Papua. After a short performance to relax a bit, to get a breather, to get some inspiration as well, we will continue with part two, which focuses on strategies. So in particular, how can we address climate racism? How can we engage with more climate just action? And we focus on the reparations movement and decolonization as strategies. And yes, so without further ado, let's... I needed to mention that we also have some Q&A moments where you can chime in, you can ask a question, please a question, not a speech, but short questions to get the conversation going and have a more open dialogue together. And you can ask those questions in Dutch, in English, or if you like in Papiamento. There are some translation options here we can take care of. But we will first start by zooming in on climate racism. What is it exactly? And for this, I'd like to invite Jurmer Bomba, who is a community organizer and mobilizer for Greenpeace, the Netherlands.
Hello. Hey. Okay. Hi guys. How you guys doing? Oh, response. Nice. Okay. Good. That's good to hear. All right. So Siobhan also already mentioned the name Malcolm Ferdinand. He wrote a book called The Colonial Ecologies, a book that I'm reading as well. And what I'm about to explain or read is inspired by his own words as well. Okay? So I want to take you guys on a little journey. If you want, you can close your eyes so you can imagine it, and let's go from there. Okay? Now, imagine we are in a storm. You have gray clouds coming above, you hear thunder, lightning, the wind is gusting heavily. Dramatic effect. And then you see the ocean is swelling, is getting more and more heavier. Okay, this is it's a pretty dark situation that we're going into. Okay? Now, imagine that this is the climate crisis that we're currently in. So, as Siobhan also mentioned, last year we have forest fires, we have record droughts all over. We have flooding going on. A third of Pakistan has been flooded. We have islands being threatened to disappear under the sea level. Now, this is the climate crisis that we're currently in, okay? Let's park that. Now, imagine we have a boat built with the best technology and best engineers worked on this boat. They have like temperature control, they got the best sensors. So they have the best possible ways to navigate us through this storm. Now this storm doesn't seem as bad as it was. Okay. Yes? Okay. Now, imagine that not everyone is on the same boat. We have the same storm brewing, same storm is going on, but not everyone is on the same boat. So we have some people that are living comfortably, probably in a jacuzzi, inside the boat. You know you have your life vest, you know you have your reddingsboten, like the little... Lifeboats, thank you. And then you have some people that are maybe in another boat, like a little rift or a little raft on the water. Some people are struggling in the water, and some people are already dead. Okay? This is climate racism. So we have one storm. Everyone is going through the same storm, but not everyone is going through it the same. Not everyone is experiencing the same. And this is because of inequalities that already exist and continue to exist in the world that we live in. Okay? Now, normally, what tends to happen is that the people that are in this marvelous work of engineering ship tends to be people from the Western world, from the global north. People that are countries that have contributed the most to the crisis that we're in. However, those that are suffering are those that are in the water, those bodies that we see floating along in the ocean. Now, this room is filled with a diversity of people. I'm glad that you're all here. I'm glad you're here. I hope that, and I want to invite you all to listen, to learn, engage in the conversation, and to hopefully that we can find a way to put the first steps towards fixing this problem that we're in, this climate crisis, and make steps towards climate justice. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Jomer, for your let's say kickoff and invitation to think together, to transform together. So I think we can now start with the first panel. So I would like to invite our first two panelists, and in this panel we zoom in on. Yes, you can maybe already join Raki Ab and Gilberto Mauricio. And in this first panel, we zoom in on the impact of colonialism and how it's still relevant today. And so we have in the first panel Gilberto, and Gilberto is a change maker, activist, artist, and he works on governance, justice, sustainability, and change. I'm sure there's much more roles and things you do, but for now we have to make a decision. And Raki Ab, also too much to mention, but educator, activist, civil servant, and spokesperson of the Free West Papua campaign Netherlands. Yes, round of applause, please. Very good. Very happy to have you on this panel. So let's start with a more general question about climate racism. So we opened this conversation with climate racism in a more general way, but can you maybe give some specific examples or illustrations when it comes to how colonialism still is here with us today and how it might be related to the climate crisis? Maybe you can start with Gilberto. Can you maybe say something about it?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. What does it mean to live in a country where the very environment and the climate has been devastated by nature, where often you struggle to grow your own food, where often you see the consequences of having pollution and oil and the health impacts of that affecting the people that you love? That is the reality of what is climate racism. Because when we talk about climate racism, obviously we use the term climate as this catch-all and all, right? But the climate is a lot of different things. It's often the way we've treated our environment through time in such a way that it impacts the ecology around us, not just on a specific location base, but throughout the whole sphere, throughout the whole system. And climate racism in a local context often shows up as environmental racism, because it is through this environmental injustice, through the pollution of the planet and the destruction of the environment, that you get the long-term effects that is climate injustice. One specific example would be the current climate in Curacao. So what happened when the Spanish invaded and the Dutch invaded, they used a lot of the trees and local flora to create paint and to cut up for firewood. And because of the usage of that resource without the replanting and without the putting it back into place and taking care of the environment, there came a huge level of erosion. And this erosion and the impact of the lack of water and the way water is even structured on Curacao, most of the water is led to the sea. So the ocean swallows up all of the nutrients of the land by design. And what does that mean for people that have to take care of themselves or to harvest food? You know, it doesn't happen, it doesn't work. So currently in Curacao, almost 99% of our food is imported. What does that mean for the prices, right? How can people afford to live? Another aspect would be the oil refinery that arrived at the beginning of the 20th century and brought a great amount of economic opportunity for some people, or just normal jobs to survive because all the other jobs disappeared for other people, and a destruction to the land and to especially the people that lived in the most poorest of neighborhoods that continues to this day. There is, and I think some people here were born and were raised in Marchena and were raised in Wishi, which are neighborhoods in Curacao that sit downwind of the air of the refinery. And a lot of them have had to suffer with the consequences of having asthma, of having people that die from lung cancer. Like my great uncle had lung cancer, and he passed away. So it is the embodiment of this very parasitic and very destructive way of thinking that you think you can extract without ever taking care and ever returning and ever nurturing. That is the legacy of this injustice, and that is climate racism in Curacao.
Yeah, thank you. So that has also to do with just considering nature or the environment as a potential for resources with devastating effects and that are not accounted for afterwards. Thank you for. I mean, it really speaks to the imagination to look at like in Curacao in this particular way with these legacies. If we take another example of of West Papua, for example, Raki. Can you maybe say something about, are there similarities or differences between what you just heard and how environmental or climate racism expresses itself in West Papua?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, thank you, Sivent, and the organizers for having me here. Of course, I heard a lot of similarities in West Papua, but also a lot of differences. And before I highlight those, I'm really curious to have a short interaction, very short one with the audience. Can I see hands for those of you who haven't heard about West Papua? Can I see hands, please? Who haven't heard about West Papua? Exactly. And who of you are Dutch students here or Dutch citizens? Can I see hands? Dutch citizens. I think almost all the hands, that's good. Who of you have heard about West Papua after reading an article about me? Can I see hands?
I represent Raki, yes.
Okay, so now I'm going to jump into the context about West Papua. It's a former Dutch colony. It's part of the world's largest tropical island and housing the third largest rainforest in the world. For who is climate racism a new theme, a new word? Can I see hands? Then, out. All right, this is interesting. It's not something to shame for. That's important that you are here. Because from the West Papuan point of view, climate racism is about whose lives matters, as whose lives doesn't matter. If you compare to what is happening in Ukraine, I don't have to ask any of you that we know what is happening in Ukraine, right? I give guest lectures on universities and a lot of institutions in the Netherlands, history teachers. They were blown away when I give a presentation about what should be a shared history. There's a blackout about what is happening on the world's largest tropical island, housing the third largest rainforest in the middle of a storm, which we call the climate and biodiversity crisis. An important element in the introduction that Sherma just mentioned is that this storm is human-created. Several humans, because there are 5% of the world's population exists of indigenous peoples like the West Papuans, and their way of life have contributed to the preservation of more than 80% of world's remaining biodiversity. 5%. So if you will ask the indigenous West Papuans, thank you for that, indigenous West Papuans, what climate racism is all about, it's about the extraction and our way of consuming, which is terror from our point of life. Because we have the world's largest tropical island, we have the world's largest gold mine, second largest copper mine, and a lot of palm oil plantations who are destroying the West Papuans' lives. One of them is my father, murdered by the Indonesian military 4 months before I was born. And his life is just one of the 500,000. That's 1/3 of our population. In 60 years of deadly silence in the Dutch society. That's where our campaign comes in. So if you look what is happening in Ukraine, where luckily they got, which is good, 27 hours news coverage, and 60 years silence about the genocide and ecocide and ongoing colonization in West Papua, a former Dutch colony and a frontline area in a climate and biodiversity crisis. This is the reason why we are in a climate and biodiversity crisis. Because the lives of indigenous West Papuans and indigenous peoples and people in the global south are not equal as people in the global north or white lives. That's why we are here. Because if we had the same amount of news coverage like the Ukraine got today, we could stop the deforestation 50 years ago when industrialization started. And we could prevent a lot of carbon emissions because 96% of all deforestation for copper mining, fossil fuel happens on the same indigenous lands. A green left motions have shown in the Dutch parliament. So if you put all these numbers together, indigenous peoples have preserved 80% of world's remaining biodiversity and 96% of all deforestation because our way of consuming happens on the same indigenous lands. The most obvious, just and fast climate solution would be caring and protecting for the rights and lives of indigenous peoples. And West Papua and Curaçao are just 2 examples of these kind of perspectives. I'm going to leave it there.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Raki. Thank you. It is also, I think, important to know that these examples are never local examples. You know, they are connected to broader regimes, let's say, international relations of politics and economic development. So how would you think about what the role of, let's say, the Dutch government should be in these particular examples. Is there a role of the Dutch government, and if so, how is the Dutch government an ally? In what way can they play a role, or is it not like a relevant partner anymore? You want to start with Curaçao, maybe?
I mean, there's layers to this, right? The easiest layer would be the least controversial one would be protect the protectors. That's the bare minimum. So invest in protecting activists that are standing at the front lines of environmental injustices, of the forests, of the oceans. What we saw in Germany is appalling. What we see also everywhere else in the global south, particularly Brazil, where many hundreds of local indigenous activists are continuously being murdered. That's a real issue. So if we at least start being explicit about that, we can start making a difference. Number two, we're going deeper.
This one, okay.
We're going deeper because our continuous allegiance to certain big business interests is continuously destroying the world. And we're profiting from the destruction of the forest. We're profiting from the extractivism, especially from indigenous peoples, but from all across the world. We're literally built a system where it is good for there to be suffering. It is good for us to destroy the environment because it lines our pockets. So we're going to have to divest from that if we're willing. And then third of all is recognize that the system is a colonial institution that is based on extraction and is based on murder and genocide of people, everybody, including ourselves, including the Dutch, including white people themselves. Because when you do this, there is this idea that I cannot cause you harm and not harm myself. If I harm you, what I am saying is I dehumanize myself in such a way that the part of me that isn't able to connect with you is harmed and disconnected from myself. And we see the fruits of that today. And the fruits are often very, very bitter fruits. And we see it in the weather. We're like, oh, it's a nice weather today, but it's winter. Dang. We had the hottest winter day, and it's nice, but it's horrible. It feels good in the now, but what are the repercussions? Biodiversity collapse that is happening. There are projections that maybe we've actually, up to 60, 70% of all creatures have died. What does that say for us and for the future that we have, or even for the now? Because we're living in this type of little ignorance, oh no, everything is fine, la 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 la. But it's not. And waking up and sitting with the fact that what we have been, our society and the way it works, is messed up.
You want to chime in here?
Yeah, just a little point to add, I think, is to understand from the West Papuan point of view, which is a former Dutch colony, that the Netherlands government is looking away for more than 60 years. Wow. End of last year, they visited Indonesia for the G20, including the president of Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky, of course, chanting about the occupation of Ukraine and not hitting one word about the ongoing colonization and genocide of the West Papuans. This is a double standard. And the Netherlands government is not the only player. We got the entire institutions to understand. There was a professor at Technical University Delft who said, without Indonesia, as former colony of the Netherlands, the former Dutch East Indies, Technical University Delft didn't exist. Because they needed, in that area, they needed new kind of engineers to continue the colonization. I have not the illusion, as practical educated guy, experiencing the University of Life, how institutions play an important role in continuing the system of exploiting and killing people for profit. From slavery to colonization, which didn't end, if you look what is happening in West Papua, former Dutch New Guinea, to the climate and biodiversity crisis. It's the same system with the same few people on top making a lot of profit. Not paying taxes, also for the benefits of the citizens here, but exposing much more carbon than the half of the world population, just the 1%. This inequality and the need and the greed for consuming in the middle of an energy crisis is exposing us how vulnerable and how educated we are. That we're gonna need more resources for a so-called energy transition. How these resources are not coming from Amsterdam, Rotterdam, London, or New York, but from the global south, Congo, South America, or West Papua. Indonesia is the largest nickel exporter in the world. Who's going to pay the price once again for windmills and the batteries? So it's unequal, and it's about representation in all levels of our society. So the right perspective, policies will be there, so victims in the global south will stop at someday.
Yeah, thank you. Do you see some hopeful, let's say, engagement either in West Papua or in Curaçao, where there's like this hopeful, inspirational movements from the youth, or at any level, where you feel like there's change possible, and there's like a movement that you want to engage with? I mean, of course, like you are the movement in a way. You are the embodiment or the spokesperson of at least the campaign. Can you maybe say something about this kind of counter movement?
Absolutely. And, my life experience is all about activism, knowing how we have been left out by all the global powers, by corporations, and also by allies. If you look, I'm just reflecting on environmental organizations, where I have been knocking on doors for years, including other indigenous, activists. So we are facing a lot of struggle to have that important seat on table, while we are the protectors of this 80% of world's biodiversity. So how we have moved forward is by becoming resilient, because that's the only way that we can stop the destruction of our culture, our lives, and the environment. So we have built a movement in West Papua, collected 1.8 million signatures, that's 70% of our population. And I'm a proud spokesperson. We've launched a Green State Vision at COP26 with a cutting-edge, indigenous-led climate solution. We're not waiting for those in power to save us. They just should listen to us and facilitate us, because we are the guardians of those ecosystems. And in our journey in West Papua, across the Pacific, at COP27, I have met a lot of courageous activists from indigenous movements, from the global south, who are taking the lead themselves. So what we have to do here is just listen and facilitate them. You don't have to bring the solutions. We are the solution. And this is that I'm confident. And we see students at Technical University Delft becoming an ally, at Greenpeace, at Friends of the Earth, who are finding the courage to become a good ally for these important perspectives here. That is what gives me hope. And we know that the urgency is there, but we need more representation, more facilitation to implement our perspectives.
Yeah. So you also feel like systemic racism and colonial racism, I'm mixing up the word. Climate racism is also slowly but surely becomes an issue at the margins, perhaps, but it becomes a topic on the agenda in environmental organizations and environmental movements more and more.
Absolutely. Also, the last UN IPCC report underlined that colonization is clearly part of what caused this climate crisis. And now, because of these kind of perspectives, and the fellow activists, which we heard later, have made sure that it become more prominent. But like slavery, ending of the apartheid, ending of other struggles, it never came from the center of the power, never. It always happened from the edges of society, by the lunatics, the radicals. But at the end, history has shown that they are on the right side of history. And this is not different, unfortunately, but it's about these kind of stories, reaching to the center, to those who are in power, who have the resources, and have the courage to bring this kind of voice and perspective to the center of institutions and decision-making.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very powerful to use that kind of energy to kind of put it on the agenda, and in the boardrooms on the agenda of the actors, the powerful actors, the political actors, economic actors. Can you maybe say something about how this is relevant in Curaçao? So do you see some movement in maybe other, like some institutions, or in terms of environmental organizations in and around the Caribbean?
I think for us, especially coming from Curaçao, the challenge and the journey for us is often in regenerating systems and environments that have been almost completely destroyed and left to rot. I think when looking at our context, from food insecurity to biodiversity collapse, a lot of that has been left. And I think there's a new generation of young people, some of them are also in this room, that are rising up and taking responsibility and pushing the line, not just within institutions, but creating their own institutions and designing their own movements and their own practices in order to make this difference. So I see this work happening. Often this work is ignored. Often this work is underfunded. Often this work, there's not enough people to, people are there, but then they're only there when there's a victory, and they're not with us in the trenches, and I think the challenge is that we can continue to bring this movement together, and that we continue to arm ourselves and to get those tools and those, a lot of us are doing this work already, so we're reaching out to people, we're speaking, we're going to institutions, we're changing policies, and even that, ultimately it's not enough, but it's something, and I think the faith and the hope that I have is that is more than enough. And more than enough, not necessarily to change everything magically because in one transition, but that it sparks a flame that keeps on sparking the flames in others, right? And then suddenly you have a whole fire that won't be stopped. And I see that happening in Curaçao, and I see that happening in the Dutch Caribbean in general. In Bonaire, the young people are rising. But at the same time, there is a disconnect, right? Where the diaspora, especially living here and abroad, has had more of the opportunity to think about these things and to challenge it. But how do you do it when you are suffering, right? And the economic injustice aspect of this, right, is often not mentioned, because if you've designed a whole system that forces people to work in such a way that, one, dehumanizes themselves, and number two, does not give them an opportunity to even learn and to grow, because they're continuously having to kill themselves to work in ways that don't help them, and they're underfunded, and they have to take care of their family. There's no time to think about the trees. There's no time to think about the trees. Like, do you even have food? And this is the aspect that we don't want to talk about, because, and especially I see this when some people, especially from here, then they go back to Curaçao and they're like, oh, why does nobody care about the planet? Well, nobody has jobs. So we need to put it into context that climate justice, right, and that justice means every single aspect of that, and that when we want to target this racism, we also have to talk about the fact, right, that the most of the rich families on Curaçao are people that got reparations money from the Dutch government. Like, that's literally true. You can literally Google this online. There is a document called Borderelle, and then you look at all of the last names, and then you check who are the rich people today. It's the same damn people. So they are benefiting from that, and they own everything. So there is a deep, and it cuts. But it is the truth, and if we want to move on from that into justice, right, and let go of this is the legacy of racism also, the fact that even though we have slavery excuses, the people got millions, and we got nothing, jack squat right now. So, show me the money, woo!
We will pick up on these issues about reparations and climate justice issues more after in the second half. So that is a good segue already. But I think we have also a few minutes for questions and answers from the audience. Questions about climate racism, either regarding Curaçao or West Papua or any other climate racism related problem. We mostly explored climate racism in terms of it being, as an issue, what does it mean, etc. Are there any questions to Raquel or Gilberto? And they will have a mic Yeah, just wait 1 second for the mic. Please be brief and share your question. Thank you.
I think there's a huge role for Western countries to play, especially the governments, but what role do these vulnerable island nations have to play, the governments, and what role are they currently playing?
Mm-hmm. You mean the role of local governments, for example, in Curaçao,
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, you want?
I mean, it's a dual role, because on the one hand, they are taking responsibility and partaking in specific alliances with other islands. At the same time, I don't think they're doing enough. I think particularly I can only speak for Curaçao in that sense. I think we should be doing much more when it comes to climate in general, because we're so busy running against the fact, there's an economic issue, so that's often the reason why they don't really pay attention to that. But there is a dynamic that is happening between the Dutch and Curaçao that can be very problematic when it comes to actually getting the chance to prioritize this, because if your only priority is reforms in an institutional sense, as not reforms that actually target issues, then how are we going to do it? So I think there is a role for islands, and is often when it comes to advocating, but also implementing local and global projects. For example, I work for an organization called Colectivo, and we're designing regenerative economies by investing in ecosystem restoration. So using projects like that as kind of a centerpiece, as a showcase of how it can be different, and collaborating with other islands in the region can strengthen their resolve, and in essence create communities and solidarities that protect each other when the worst happens. Yeah. So that's how islands can make a difference. That being said, often it's very hard for them to collaborate on that level, because other issues and the institutional global framework tends to not facilitate those types of cooperations. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Thank you. Does it resonate with you, Raki?
Yeah, absolutely. Just one thing that I'm aware of is that there's an amazing, important campaign going on, led by small island states.
The WICJ, right?
WICA, the advisory opinion call at the Peace Palace, where they hope to have the highest court having a say about climate change and loss and damage and all those kind of things are there on the table. So I think that's an important campaign to follow, and it's been led by the small island states to hold accountability by the corporations and the government who look away. So I think that's something.
Yeah. It's always part of an international set of relations.
Yes.
Thank you. Other questions? Anyone? Yes. Yeah.
Quick. I thought there was a whole row.
Running. Yes.
Can I stand? Actually, I really want to thank Raki, because you're the one that actually got me. I'm used to holding this, but that got me into climate change. There was a lecture that you gave, and I was like, how can I help? I'm a local politician. Is there something I can do? And I remember I was like, you know what? You're in one of the richest countries in the world. Every city that you can have an influence, also your own actions in this economy, influences this. So thank you for that. And right now I'm in Leiden, trying to make an impact that same way. But here's my question. Please hold it.
Don't cancel him.
In all your years, actually, that you've been working on this, what's your proudest achievement?
Wow, that's a big question. Having an audience, having ears to hear the story. Otherwise, I could better sit at home. And my goal is to make all of you believe the power you have as an individual. We are not powerless. And the magical part is that we hear other kind of stories and get inspired, get motivated, and got hope to work together. Because that's where change is starting. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you. Nice one. Very good. Yes. We have some time for more questions, if there are any.
Hit up.
There's one there, here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Nice. Thank you, everyone, for this event. I wondered if you, following up on the first question, what do you know or think about the role of the IMF and the World Bank in climate racism? Maybe it's too much for now, but I wondered if you have some thoughts and if you see any change there. I don't know, negatively or positively.
A big, powerful international...
I don't think IMF has done as much change. I think IMF has not really done a lot at all. I think the World Bank has attempted to do some reforms in the way that they do things and in the way that they give development support. So there is some movement, at least from what I know about the World Bank. I think the IMF's whole existence and the structure that it has is extremely problematic because I mean, those two institutions are often bracketed together because they were developed and created together, but I think the purpose of the IMF is totally different from the purpose of the World Bank. On the one hand, the World Bank is actually designed to, supposedly at least, help develop countries, while the IMF is this type of loan shark that is kind of, that we all agreed to. Well, technically speaking, they could just forgive all the debts if they wanted to. So the development aspect, the people working for the development institutions, namely the World Bank, are noticing that they have to make a change, but their relationship with the governments and the relationship in the currently existing order is kind of sketchy. But there's some hope, I would say. Let me say that.
Thank you for the question. What I would add to that is that looking at West Papua, it's the richest province of Indonesia. We are just one mine, the world's largest government, is the largest taxpayer to Indonesia, to the Indonesian government. And if you read reports, West Papua is a developing country, like the entire African continent. How we know the resources are being extracted for the profits in the global north and other parts of the world. So yes, of course, these IMF developments, there are several elements that you can say, there's developing there. But most of it is because they will, benefit their own economies or their power structures or whatever industries, if you compare to what's happening in West Papua as well. I'm also the climate justice spokesperson for Extinction Rebellion, and I'm gonna, at the end of the month, I will join the top of Dutch financial sectors in a so-called meeting or brainstorm session, and this is what I'm going to highlight to them. The finance sector has caused this climate crisis, making profit. Are the pension funds, or the Dutch government subsidies to fossil fuel industries in the middle of a climate and biodiversity crisis? Money counts. So where we put our money in more destruction or in, preserving ecosystems or protecting human rights, it matters. And in all these institutions, from IMF to World Banks to governments to pension funds, these are all destroyers of ecosystems of human lives.
And I'd add on to this and say, the existence of the World Bank is a consequence of a system that is extractivist and unjust. Like, the whole reason why they are developing countries is because the actual value of what they are and what they have is not being valued accurately by society. So even the World Bank can do their best, and the IMF can do their best, but their existence is inherently destructive because it means that they are seen as like a, like a pleister. Just stop the gaping wound that has not healed. If it hasn't healed, you can't fix it with a random institution or even with a subsidy. You have to reach to the core. You have to reach to the root, right? Like, that's why radical action is necessary.
Yeah. So otherwise, it remains symptoms. Addressing only symptoms. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. I think we have time for one last question. No? Do we have time for one? Only if there is a question.
Roberto, thank you for your story. It's really, really telling. I think a lot of people here speak Dutch, but let's keep it English anyway. Raki, 5 sentences. Why do the Dutch people don't know about West Papua? Why do we know about Indonesia but not West Papua? From a political perspective, 5 sentences for them.
Because it has the involvement of the royal family, of Philips, of Shell, and the Dutch government. Everyone is involved. If you look at the apologies which I support to slavery, to Indonesia, this chapter is still a secret because they're all involved. And the sense that this is the most explosive chapter in the history. If you look at what's in Groningen, the farmers, or slavery now, West Papua is a time bomb. That's why they have been kept it out of the curriculums, history curriculums, out of the institutions, and that's why we are still overwhelming prominent institutions such like Wageningen University, TU Technical University, Delft, and other prominent players, because we become the educator when the entire society has been silenced. So thank you for the question, but now you have been educated, and the beautiful part in this is that you can become powerful change makers and storytellers yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. On that note, thank you, Draki and Gilberto. Thanks both so much. So that finishes off the first panel. Before we move on to the second panel, where we kind of explore potential strategies to really engage with climate justice, decolonization, and the potential of reparations, we have a short, let's say, artistic performance, if I can. Junie Martina. Junie is a multilingual rapper, artist from Curaçao, and will perform his new song, Mamatera. And there are some translations of the lyrics, and they will be projected on the screens on your left hand or right hand. Please, round of applause for Junie.
Um, 15 years ago in high school, when I told a few friends of mine that I was going to study environmental sciences in Wageningen University, they laughed at me. That was in Curaçao. And here we are today. I'm realizing that sustainability and, the environmental movement is becoming bigger and bigger. So before I start, I would like to take a 30-second Zen mode, meditation mode, for all the people that have been fighting for climate justice for the past 100, 150 years, and that we can be able to sit here today and talk about it and continue this fight. Just 30 seconds. If you want, you can close your eyes. My voice is not necessarily that soothing, so I'll just shut up. A relação turbulenta foi de começo. Amor intenso entre nós, como te sigo dolor, sem me saco, me te estimava no mesmo momento. E botar-me em culpa, de se admitir, de ser costume de proveito, de cambio para meu preço. Portar para mim com o babai, me que por batrobe, de doce intento. Passou me saco, me pôr, e se babai, bobida te sigue, me saqueasse com dime, me probiba sem bo, nos mister de. Nota mi mister de bo, mi egoísmo te causa que relação te tem doce, é futuro de nós. A água que tá escuro, nosso futuro junto a água que tá pinta preto mané uma, é um com a usa, mas abusar de cada recurso que eu tenho de uma culpa, não vai. Mister de bo, que bo queda me lá em cor. Perché da me su un cono, mamatera. Relação turbulenta foi de começo. Amor intenso entre nós, como te sigo dolor, se me saco, me te estimava no mesmo momento. E botar-me em culpa, de se admitir, esse costume de abuso de como foi meu preço. Então prometo babai, me que tu ideia trobe, de doce intento. di dos intento. Passou me saco, me porri, si bobai. Bobida da sigi, min saki asiku di mi por bibo simbo. Nos mester di, nota mi mester di bo, mi urnid. É futuro de nós, a walkie tá escuro. Mi futuro a walkie junto tá bir preto. Preto mané uma, é com a usa, mas abusar de cada cultura que tem no meu corpo. E mistério bo, que vou quedar me lá em cus. Ei, peguei da mesmo corno. Mesmo cono, mamadeira no vai, no. Mistério bo, que vou quedar me lá em cus. E queda mesmo cono, mamadeira no vai. This is Mama Tera, featuring Kev, produced by Denzel, and I'm Juni Martina. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I would like to have like a 1 hour, maybe a 1 hour set next time. That's beautiful. Thanks so much. All right, so let's segue into the second half of this evening. In this second half, we will explore, as I mentioned, potential strategies, ways of moving out of the catastrophe that is climate racism. In this second half, we'll first explore the meaning and potential of reparations in order to address colonial legacies and climate racism. After we explore the issue of reparations, we will zoom in on the potential of decolonization and climate justice. But as mentioned, first we'll talk some more on the role of reparations, what it means, and what it can do for us. And I think we have a connection. I hope we have the audio is working properly. Together with us, Esther Stamford-Jose, and Esther is a legal specialist and an international expert on reparations. And she also speaks with world leaders about reparatory social justice. Welcome, Esther. Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. So Esther, if I just can start out with a very basic question, just to get us started. Can you say something about what reparations are, just generally speaking?
So we have to look at the meaning of the word reparations, because I think in perhaps popular perception, reparations is seen as being money, okay? That's what the media promotes. But reparations really go to the root of the term réparer. And what that means is to renew, to restore, or to remedy something that has been harmed, okay? Now, there's no universal theory on reparations that fits all groups or communities or peoples, but Professor Rebecca Sosi, who is an indigenous Yaqui law professor based in North Abiyala or USA, argues that when looking at reparations for native nations or indigenous people, specifically, which is what her expertise is, that you have to account for different kind of indigenous historical experiences with colonizers. Then it must be an intercultural framework, and also it must recognize indigenous epistemologies, frameworks of knowledge, which is really, really key. So if you come from a culture that actually commercializes everything, reduces people to property, reduces Mother Nature, Mother Earth to property, then you will just see reparations as just being a financial transaction.
Yes.
But most indigenous people, First Nations, African people, Asian peoples, colonized peoples, we don't have that way of actually relating to our Mother Earth. And our ways of relating to Mother Earth were demonized during colonialism, which is part of some of the drivers, as we know, of the climate crisis today. So in reparations movements, of which there are many, I specifically am an organizer within the International Social Movement for African Reparations. But within that context, we work with other reparationists from other peoples, communities, and nations. And essentially, there are two main frameworks on reparations that people should be aware of. There is the international law framework, which is probably what most people might be familiar with, hopefully. And under international law, reparations is a multifaceted remedy, to address violations, wrongs, harms that have been perpetrated against groups, peoples, and individuals. And it begins with, first of all, a cessation of the violations, a stopping of the harm. And that also has to bring about sort of what's called assurances and guarantees of non-repetition, which means that repair must entail ensuring that whatever harm of colonialism, the climate crisis, climate injustice, climate racism, et cetera, is ended, okay? Whatever actions are causing that must stop. It also entails restitution, which is really, really important, okay? And that is about putting a people or a group back in a position that they would have been in, but for colonialism, but for dispossession, but for all the pillage that has happened. Compensation is what most people think of and reduce reparations to, but under international law, compensation is only one of the 5 principles of reparations. And in fact, compensation should go towards resourcing restitution efforts. In the case of colonialism, what does it mean then to restore a people to their relationship with land? Okay, so all the conquest that has occurred, which has meant that European multinational corporations are depriving communities of land, even under the guise of trying to address the climate crisis. With moving indigenous peoples from land that they've lived on, protected, and been stewards over for centuries. It also entails what's called satisfaction, which is known as symbolic reparations. Rehabilitation, because trauma, intergenerational oppression causes harm within communities, within the fabric of societies, okay? It takes away the agency and that kind of sense of that we can transform our condition. And so rehabilitation is really, really important, even to deal with some of the psychosocial sort of consequences of dispossession, of ecocide, of genocide, and the destruction of a people's language, culture, identity, and relationship with Mother Nature. And those are the aspects of reparations under international law. But essentially, reparations mean repair. And that has to be holistic. It's not one thing, it's multifaceted, because the harm is economic, it's political, it's social, it's cultural, it's environmental, it's harm in our relationships amongst each other as peoples, but also within our own groups. So all of that needs to be repaired.
Yes, thank you. That's very powerful. Thank you. I think it's a really important insight to move away from the idea that reparations are only transactional, financial repairing. There's so much more. I think you mentioned on the international law, was there also a second framework you wanted to?
Yeah, the second framework is known as the Chimwezu framework. And Chimwezu is a Nigerian public intellectual, and we call that the conceptual framework. And so he basically emphasizes the holistic nature of repair, being, as I sort of went on to mention some of the strands, economic, political, social, cultural, repair, economic repairs. He talks about sort of ideological repairs. He talks about institutional repairs, repairs of every kind that we need to restore ourselves, rebuild our sense of power in order to actually transform our condition. And in the context of our conversation this evening, that is about not only mitigation, but adaptation, transformative adaptation. How communities themselves have to be part of being the change to affect the kind of changes that we need, because we cannot rely just on states or and governments and corporations or even politicians. This change has to be rooted in communities living on the ground who are actually facing the worst manifestations of the climate and ecological crisis and colonialism today.
Yeah, so that's also part of a broader, let's say, comprehensive approach to reparations. And so I'm wondering, how do you then conceive of the role of the government, of public programs? How are they just a part of the problem? Do they play a key role? How would you envision that?
They can play a key role if we have governments that actually are decolonized. And we know that no government really in the world has been able to effectively decolonize. And certainly not European governments. And what often happens is that when states appropriate resources, saying that we're going to say like the CARICOM in the Caribbean region, which has a reparation strategy, which they are sort of, labeling as development. Now, development is a right of peoples also, and it's a responsibility of states to actually develop, yes? So you can't sort of conflate reparations, which is a remedy for specific, in international law or legal terms, the term victim gets used. It's a horrible term to think of, but victim really just means that you are recognized in law as being injured, as being harmed, and therefore having a right to a remedy and reparation. So in that sense, conflating reparations with development actually ends up, putting money into state coffers, colonial kind of projects and programs that do nothing to fundamentally transform the power relations between oppressed, colonized people. Still, this is not a historic experience. We've heard about, West Papua, we've heard about Curacao in terms of colonization and the Dutch state and how that is continuing. So an essential part of stopping the harm is decolonization, Decolonization is an unfinished project, yes, and that's because a lot of our liberation movements have been, they've been attacked, they've had all kinds of divide and rule, we've had many of our leaders incarcerated, killed, assassinated, etc., and this has an impact on communities' ability to organize safely, especially where we know, especially talking about places like West Papua, the killings of many of the freedom fighters who are simply seeking to defend their right to live in harmony with the lands that they have been stewarding for centuries.
Thank you. Thanks so much. It's a really really helpful and productive way of understanding reparations in its multiplicity, in the different kinds of ways, and not depending on only like state formations or the nation state, as if that would be the remedy and would help us in one way or another. I think given the time we can go to questions. We don't have to go to the questions, but we can go to the questions. So let's have a conversation. And if there are any questions about the different, let's say, reparation pathways, there are ideas that you might have, particular questions you want to address to Esther, just please raise your hand, and then we can have a hybrid Q&A with Esther. Anyone? I see a hand. It's a bit dark, but from this point of view. Oh, here. Okay. Yes. First there.
Last year, Macron from France, he's now going to, where is it? Mururoa, because there was a big harm of the 300 nuclear explosions. And so they're saying they're going to repair with money, but those people were living on an island, had a good life, and they got cancer. Their whole community is destroyed. I wonder how they can repair there. They say, yeah, we're going to give money, but what can you do with money if you're living on an island, you have a good life, and your whole community is destroyed?
Yeah, so in this context, I guess when they're talking about repair or reparations, they're talking about, a financial transaction in terms of a compensatory payment, which is not full repair. And actually, reparations as a remedy must entail not just compensation, it must also include other aspects. Now, in that particular instance that you've raised, where you have people who are experiencing forms of cancer disproportionately, then rehabilitation as a remedy becomes very, very important, because cancer treatments cost money. The kind of social conditions that are also exacerbating people's chances of actually getting cancer in the future. The link between where you're living and what they call now planetary health, where the environmental dimensions of where we live and the circumstances in which we live have an impact on how we give birth, the kind of conditions that our children have, etc., etc. So in this case, I think it's also important to state that in some instances, there cannot be full repair. And this is about recognizing the magnitude of the harm and the intergenerational consequences of which we are now seeing the effects today in populations living. But these effects have been generated as a result of decades, and in some instances, centuries of dispossession, colonization, and actually what some of us would argue from a legal standpoint is genocide and ethnocide, in the sense of how Dr. Raphael Lemkin actually meant the term to be used, because in Raphael Lemkin's estimation, the terms ethnocide and genocide could be used interchangeably when you're talking about a destruction of a people and their way of life and the institutions, the essential foundations of their life, their community institutions, their health institutions, their family institutions, their economic institutions, how we grow our food. And when you interfere with that, even though the people may remain very much harmed and injured in terms of poor health outcomes, etc., then actually you have destroyed the group. And we've seen that in many cases of colonized peoples.
Thank you, Esther. I think there was one, maybe you have time for one more question. I saw a hand being raised in this corner here. Kjeld, I think you were, we have time, ample time at the bar to continue the conversation, but just one final brief question.
I was wondering how you think about those slavery apologies you now sometimes see by some governments. Do you see that as a window dressing, or really see that as good change?
First of all, these apologies are coming about, pseudo-apologies in some cases, and statements of regret are coming about because of pressure from below and the agency of movements who are trying to force accountability, raising consciousness in society, etc. Now, with that being said, the danger now becomes when states, like in the case of the state there, makes an apology, but then it's not an apology of substance, in that it doesn't actually embrace full repair under international law, the principles of international law, which include, as I said, the restitution, the compensation, the rehabilitation, the satisfaction and guarantees of non-repetition. So they are actually a way, in my view, of trying to quell the real sort of revolutionary demands. And when I say revolutionary, I mean in the sense of the term revolution, which means an about change, 360-degree change. So it's revolutionary to say land back to indigenous peoples, that they have a right to be caretakers of land. That is revolutionary when we live in a system that is predicated on dispossession. And so these kind of apologies are designed to actually pacify the more systemic transformational aspects of repair movements that know window dressing and even throwing money at a problem of historical injustice when we're moving into digital currencies and monies can actually be changed in terms of the international financial market. So whatever money in this current economic system might be awarded or even spoken of for whatever projects and programs is only going to be a fraction of the real kind of monetary values and wealth extraction that continues. So they are very diversionary, especially if they are not tied to demands of movements that can actually enforce accountability. And those demands coming from below, for us, I'm a reparationist, but I'm also an environmentalist, okay? And we recognize this notion of planet repairs. And that means when safeguarding the rights of past, present, and future generations, there is a need to proceed from a standpoint of pluriversality. That's the kind of world that we're looking to co-create, that highlights the nexus between reparatory justice, environmental justice, and cognitive justice. And therefore, there is an impetus to repair holistically our relationship with and inseparability from Mother Earth, the environment, and the pluriverse, giving due recognition to indigenous knowledges in contrast with Western-centric Enlightenment ideals that separated humanity from nature, thereby justifying exploitation for capital accumulation. The Algonquin people speak about Wetiko. African people speak about Urugu. This mind state, this mind virus of consumption, of cannibalism that feels that we can just sell our mother and pillage our Mother Earth that sustains all our life is what we need to transform. And that also needs to be transformed within us, who have been colonized, who have been enslaved, and neo-colonial states that stand, as relics of empire. We need total systemic transformation in order to restore Earth sovereignty, which is the basis of indigenous sovereignty and all people's sovereignty. If we don't have Earth sovereignty, no people can actually, claim their own sovereignty.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you. Thanks so much, Esther, for this powerful reflections and insights. I mean, this is so powerful to have this idea of reparations in a kind of holistic way, have it on the table, and to really engage in that way. Thanks so much for now, because we will segue into the second part of the second half, of the panel, and there I would like to invite two other speakers to the floor, to the table, and those are Sheila Ishwadat, and Sheila is an organizer speaker on decolonialism, intersectionality, and climate justice. Yes, round of applause. Yes. And Turma is back. Yes. Yes, yeah. Community organizer, mobilizer, Greenpeace. You all know by now. Okay. And Esther, please join if you want to chime in in the second half, because it's part of the same kind of conversation. So with Sheila and Sharma, we'll talk about decolonization and what the potential and the role of decolonization is, what it actually means when we think about climate justice. And so let's basically start with this very first question, Sheila. So what does decolonization mean, in particular in relation to the idea of climate racism and the climate catastrophe? What is it, and why do we need it?
Thanks for this question, and thanks for inviting me here. It's really a joy to be speaking about this topic, even though it's sad that it's necessary. What does decolonization mean? It means so many things, and it's not. You cannot really capture it in one phrase. It's really a process that we have to go through, and it includes so many different things. Colonization of our being, colonization of our thoughts, colonization of our economy, and all these things need to be decolonized. And we need to think about how do we decolonize our education? How do we decolonize our thoughts? And in relation to the environment, Esther also really mentioned it before, and in the previous panel it was also mentioned, we need to reconnect to nature, and we need to think about why we're actually separating us as human beings from nature. Why are we using these two terms as if they are two separate categories? Humans are nature. We are part of that. We are part of this whole ecosystem, and there are many thinkers that are addressing it in different ways. And also, it has been part of many ancient and indigenous knowledges since a long time, since forever. There are many languages in which there is no separation of the word nature as something separate from the human. And this is something very Western. It's something that really came up during the colonial period. Because nature needed to be subjectified and objectified. It needed to be used as a product, as a resource. And now making the link to racism, in the same way, some humans were subjected as objects to be used, to be enslaved, to be working on plantations, to be replaced and to be reproduced in the way that these colonizing countries and these colonizing powers wanted. So it's really about this subjectification and objectification of both nature and of some human beings over others.
So, and in this particular way, then decolonization also means to move away from this binary thinking, humans versus nature, but also beyond the hierarchical thinking of some people being more worthy of having a good life than others. And can you maybe say something about how this relates to, let's say, the climate movement or climate activism that we can see around us for, so many years already? Is that also decolonization, or is something missing there? How do you see those two connected or not connected?
I can only speak from experience. No, I cannot only speak from experience in the Netherlands. I also did activism in other countries. But let me speak from my experience in the Netherlands. And I think climate activism in the Netherlands or in Europe is very colonized still. It's very colonial. And it's racist, it's sexist, it's heteronormative. And there are ways in which some groups and some parts of these groups are trying to overcome these separations and these hierarchies and these binaries. But the general assumptions are still there. There are still these hierarchies are completely intertwined in these ways of activism, these ways of organizing, these ways of decision-making. So, for instance, there aren't many people of color, indigenous or black people that are in, these kind of actions that you're, like this Hippo action, for example, that was a few months ago. Why? For many reasons. It's unsafe. We don't feel safe. We don't feel protected. Police is attacking some people still. So we're still dealing with the same system. We're dealing with the government, we're dealing with the police, the marechaussee, for instance. And I actually had that experience when I was there. that they were asking me and another person of color for extra identification and extra information. And they didn't do that for other white people, white activists. And there is not enough attention to this, and it's brushed away as, oh, you know, it's just a coincidence. But it's not, it's structural. And this is just what racism is. It is structural. And all these incidences, I can have so many examples, but they're not incidences. They're structural. They're not just for me, they're for so many people that experience this. And these organizations really need to think deeply about how they are acting in colonial ways. And also, coming back to that point about human nature, if you read reports of the WWF, of Greenpeace, these distinctions are still being made. We need to protect nature. It's a separate category from we need to protect racism or sexism or any kind of other type of oppression, but they are intersecting.
Okay, so the kind of climate, let's say, movements or climate activisms that we can see around us still kind of reproduce sometimes those problematic structures that we want to move away from. Decolonization is a way to move beyond those.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. So maybe shifting gears a bit, Germer, there's an interesting campaign. It's called Bonaire campaign. Can you maybe say something about this campaign and how it might relate to the conversation about climate justice and a potentially decolonized, let's say, flavor of it?
Yeah. Let me think of it like this. So currently, Greenpeace is doing a climate justice campaign on Bonaire. And for those who may not know, Bonaire is currently what we call a special municipality of Holland, or the Netherlands. Now, what that means is, well, what it means. So let's break it down.
Yes.
Okay. In the grondwet, so in the Constitution. Thank you, guys. I like this feedback. Okay, so in the Constitution, basically it says that Bonaire, St. Eustatius, and Saba are part of the Netherlands, as we know as like grondgebied, so like as actual territory. So neocolonial, but that's something else. This means, or what was promised, is that there would be equal rights for citizens across the whole country. Now, how this plays out is that we do not have equal rights. So if we think, okay.
That's not funny, but
no, but it resonates. It's resonating.
Sure.
Okay.
Recognition. Okay.
Yeah. So, for example, here in the Netherlands, we have a BSN number, and this allows you to have access to many things, for example, insurance and things like that. People from the not only from the Best Islands, but also from Curaçao, Aruba, and St. Martin, even though they're also part of the Dutch kingdom, we all have the same passport. They do not have the BSN. They have an old, outdated system. Now, for example, I know many of the, some faces here. Many of us that come here as well, we come as students to study this, and it's almost like a conveyor belt. If you want to continue higher education, you have to go to the Netherlands. So we don't even look at options to go to universities in the Caribbean or in South America, for example, because we think this is the way we have to go.
Yeah.
And this also has its own links to the colonial past, but I'll spare you guys that detail. But so where it comes to is that, for example, these people, they do not have a BSN, so when they come here, they're already met with barriers to enter society as they would be here. Now, if we look at also in the Netherlands, so in 1953 there was the noodwaterramp, so there was a massive storm that basically flooded a very big part of the Netherlands. Since then, there's been a lot of research, a lot of efforts, a lot of resources put into doing more research to prevent something from happening again on this scale, but also in the most rarest scenarios, how can we deal with this? there has been little to no research for any of the islands as to what risks they run as we're looking at climate change.
Yeah.
And there is no plan. So, for example, with this campaign, Greenpeace took it upon themselves. So let's say, okay, we're going to do the research ourselves. We're going to fund it ourselves. And this research showed, for example, that Bonaire, so the island that I come from, so for the people that can see it on the sides, a fifth of the island is being threatened to disappear under the sea level. And for example, I can show here that you can see these yellow buildings. These are slave huts. These are also remnants of the colonial past that can also disappear under the water. So we're actually also deleting history in this climate crisis as well.
Oh, okay.
I'll pause here.
Yeah, yeah. So this effort to look into or to research or explore the potential of a quote unquote, delta plan for the islands would be a way to, let's say, prepare for the climate catastrophe or to be more adaptive and to be more resilient.
At least it offers perspective. So if you have research done, at least you can kind of grasp what is the scale of the crisis or the risks that we're facing. So then you can think about how do we face these risks. Not so long ago, there was a congress for the Delta work, so for the waterschappen here in the Netherlands, and these islands, none of the islands were included. So again, we're seeing we're being left out of these conversations. So we say the Netherlands has a lot of expertise. We can share these expertises, but we don't see it happening.
So we need to decolonize the Rijkswaterstaat and to get them to do the actual stuff, the actual work.
That will be a first step, yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's say, Esther, can I ask you a follow-up question? And how do you see those two concepts working, like reparations and decolonization? I think they might be different, but not entirely different. So how would you see those two concepts working in tandem?
Well, I'm reiterating the point I made about which knowledge framework we're using. If we're using a sort of Eurocentric framework, we will see them as, sort of separate. If we look at indigenous frameworks, and in particular, if I talk from an African-centered perspective, you cannot have reparations or reparatory justice without decolonization. That is part of guarantees of non-repetition. It's also part of a cessation of violations, which is violations of colonialism, and actually a denial of people's sovereignty, which has been usurped as a result of not only colonization, but the remaining coloniality. So the two are interchangeable, and that's really how I see it, and how many of the people that I'm working with. So for instance, within our movement, we see reparations in terms of one of the strategic goals as being a repaired Africa, that is an Africa that eradicates these colonial borders of the 1884-1885 Berlin Conference, but also that, and we refer to that repaired Africa, which is a sort of sovereign union of African communities, of the pre-colonial African communities that currently are sort of forced to take up different nationalities because European colonialists basically separated indigenous African ethnicity and nationality from their own kin group. And in one place they're called a Nigerian, another place they might be called a Ghanaian, when they're the same people, literally. So that is part of the decolonization agenda that was aborted and thwarted as a result of actually the assassination of many of our leaders who were trying to build a united Africa. And that was always deemed as a threat. And we saw that more recent times with the assassination of Muammar Gaddafi, who was also trying to promote that same agenda and was in support of African reparations. Now, this repaired Africa cannot just exist as a kind of nirvana by itself in a disrepaired world, okay? And that's where we see the importance of other people's struggles to affect decolonization and reparations in its full sense. And we refer to that world as Ubuntu Dunia. And it really is based on this notion of Ubuntu, which is recognizing that we are beings, human beings through other beings. So how we treat each other is an indication of us becoming human, and also recognizing that we are also related to other aspects of nature. Yeah, we are nature, as has already been emphasized. So Ubuntu Dunia and Ma'at Ubuntu Man are essential pillars of the African struggle for reparations. And I'm somebody born in the diaspora with parents who were born in the Caribbean. Let me just make that very clear. But globally, my ancestry is from the continent of Africa. So that is a decolonized world, that is looking at material decolonization. Yes, I agree, decolonization is about decolonization of thought and economic systems, but it has to have a structural material base. And the way in which land is still being pillaged and not recognized as actually being sovereign in terms of earth jurisprudence is part of the problem. And the mind state which seeks to benefit from not only colonization but that coloniality, and also force us, the descendants of enslaved and colonized people, to accept the world order as it is. But colonizers went around the world, put maps here, there, and everywhere, and declared it their own territory. Now, because of the harm they're causing on Mother Earth, they think they can go to Mars and colonize Mars and all other planets. This has to end.
Yes. Thank you, Esther. Yes. So we have a few more minutes for this panel before we go to some questions. And I want to probe a little bit more into how we can decolonize or engage in reparations in one way or another, for example, in a country like the Netherlands. And what, yes, you can decolonize the Rijkswaterstaat or whatever, but what are potential, how do you see, what are potential examples that you think are really worthwhile or inspirational? If you think about it can be local, but it can also be transnational, like a cooperation between different countries, or a movement, anything that you find particularly inspiring, except from the great project you're already, the campaign.
I think it's also inspiring from the other islands. If I think of, for example, the Torres Strait Islands in Australia, they also sued the Australian government, and they actually won. So now the Australian government has to put in more effort to also make sure that they can preserve their culture, their language, and their lands, and also go into more in conversation with them, like meaningful conversation. We've seen also, it was also mentioned earlier today, we have other islands like Tuvalu, Vanuatu, also putting pressure on a global scale. These are also other campaigns that inspired us, that now we're applying pressure on the Dutch government, but I hope that this also inspires more Caribbean islands so that this becomes a massive global movement, that we inspire change, that we hold governments also accountable, especially governments from the global north, where these are the governments that enabled for the biggest polluters to establish themselves in the global south, causing this climate crisis, and that now we have to bear the brunt of it. So we need to hold these governments also accountable, along with these big fossil corporations.
Yeah. Thank you. So indeed, yes, this international collaboration is really important and powerful. Do you have maybe an inspirational or an example that you can really that really resonates with you in this point?
Yes. Well, like I mentioned, there are so many ways in which decolonization needs to happen. And I think it's important for people to really think about, where do I put my energy, where do I put my effort, and not only about the question, where do I put my money, because some people are really talking about your consumer vote, and I can give a critical note on that. But I think there are so many organizations working for or against racism, or for decolonization, or thinking about these colonial structures. Really think about where you put your energy. And I really encourage people to not keep waiting until some government is going to change something. And I am quite done waiting and asking for change. I am trying to embody that change, be that change, and work with people who actually want to make change happen. And that is so empowering. And that is so important, to not keep waiting. And I think that's really resonating with what you said. These island states, like going for it and not like keep asking and keep waiting until something else is going to happen, but really like be that change.
Yeah. Thank you. Nice. Yeah. Yes. I think we then want to give also space to the audience, some questions for this panel. Yes.
Hi.
Mic check.
Mic check? Yes.
Yeah.
Sheila, hi. Thank you so much for what you just said a minute ago. But it did get me thinking in terms of questions, in terms of resources. When you say, okay, let's go and be the change and do the changes, it comes back to the point of resources, because some changes, of course, they can be grassroots, but some of these bigger, major changes, they require a lot of resources in terms of money, but also structural changes. So what is your position in that sense?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, it's really, really, I don't know how to really call that, but it's really it's a big issue and a big like hindrance to the work that we're trying to do. And imagine fighting Shell, such a company with like so much money and so much power, and they have like hands in every government, and like that there are so many other multinational companies, or even like just other people with a lot of money that we're trying to fight against. But you know, I'm really trying to stay positive, and I believe in also like community and solidarity, and I think also with love, which is, I think, a really, really important factor that we shouldn't forget. Love can really connect us and make us stronger. So it sounds maybe a bit idealistic, fighting money with love, but I think like keep that community going, keep that solidarity going, and be that change, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. Other questions? Hands? Yes, one there, here, here.
I know that on the islands of the Caribbean islands, funding is quite an issue because there's no access to it. Because, first of all, because the islands are seen as part of the Netherlands, they're not seen as developing countries. So international funds, they cannot write to them and get those kinds of funds. But at the same time, they also can't get the same kind of funds that the Netherlands can from the EU, because the islands are not part of the EU. Do you think the EU could play a role in helping the communities and helping? Is that a step that, for example, the Dutch government could take to help decolonize? Because they won't be as dependent on the Netherlands itself for funding.
Is that a question for Chermer or anyone?
Anyone who wants to answer.
Anyone, okay.
I think there's, okay, so there is a barrier there because, for example, at the last COP, it's been said that there will be a fund being built for like, let's say, climate reparations, yeah, loss and damages. But, for example, like you said, Curaçao, even though it's an autonomous country, is still part of the Dutch kingdom, thus labeled a first world country. Mm-hmm. And then, so they don't get the right or the access to access these funds. But if we think about, so not only, the Netherlands is not the only country that has territories overseas. France has territories overseas. The UK has territories overseas. The US, there's multiple examples here, and I think opening more funds for these countries. So even though they are territories, opening these funds gives them options. But I kind of sense that even though that becomes a possibility, I think the EU in itself still kind of will hold these colonial values. So I think it offers possibilities, but I think that in Europe then in itself also would need to decolonize.
Yeah, that's a big ask.
I'll try to keep it short. So if for the Dutch context, you have a crisis here, the asylum crisis. With Ukraine, I just quit my job at COA. Couldn't last more than half a year. And before that, I had a job interview at the Rode Kruis. And I was granted a seat at the table, but they didn't. I couldn't speak more clearly, but they denied me a job. And I told Raki, I think at the time, like, yo, I'm in Den Haag. Misschien ben ik nu vaak in Den Haag weer. En ik dacht echt van, hoe ga je mij weigeren? Like, I'm ahead of my time, but not. Like, hoe zien jullie niet hoe... Dus ik was boos. En mijn vraag meer van... Ga zien hoe kolonialisme gewoon doorwerkt in alles wat je ziet. En voel het. En als je het voelt, dan moet je er gewoon wat van zeggen. Dat is mijn antwoord. Ja.
Thank you. Thanks. It's a good, nice addition. I think there's some. I made a chart of the question, the hands. Let's say, someone first in the middle here. Any one there, then here, and then there.
Yes. Just a general question. I know in response to the Greenpeace research, the Dutch government announced a climate table for Bonaire. Do you see this as like a genuine accountability or more performative?
The breath says a lot. There's possibilities. So, for example, with this climate table, this was an incentive that has been on the table. So it's not new. It's been on the table for a couple of years. There has been, Bonaire wanted a climate table to kind of already address these topics, but there wasn't resources. And now, for example, the research that we published and the threat of suing the Dutch state applied pressure, and now all of a sudden the ministries allow funding, and we appointed Ed Nijpels to be the kwartiermaker for this table. Ed is currently on Bonaire, having conversations, and these conversations, again, are with the same people you see every time at every conversation. So the local Bonaireans are not involved in these conversations where they should be at the forefront of the change that they want to see. So is it showmanship? Yeah. Does it offer the possibility? If used properly, yes. But there needs to be actual accountability also from the Dutch government to make actual efforts to address the issues and then let the people raise their voices. Give that platform.
Thank you. I think, following my chart, I think you were next in line. And please, any questions also to Sheila or Esther? She's still with us online.
Hello, my name is Rafi. I'm a student at the University of Amsterdam, where students occupied a building today in protest against the financing of Shell of university research. So that is already a win.
Yes.
So go visit if you can. And I have a question. There were multiple comments this evening about the connection between universities and colonization and colonialism, especially of the TU Delft and University of Wageningen, and how they were at the forefront of the colonial projects in Asia.
Don't forget about Leiden.
Yeah.
I know, because I work there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and my question is, if these institutions are so connected to colonialism and is it even possible to decolonize them, and who is going to do this decolonizing?
Yes. That's
1 minute. No.
That's a very good question, and I think indeed it comes down to: are we decolonizing from within or from outside? Where do you position yourself? Is it possible to decolonize an institution that's so grounded in colonialism that has even in some cases, almost been established only to promote colonialism, and that is still continuing that same framework and that same export of knowledge and white supremacy, basically, abroad. That is also extracting knowledge and information from other places and appropriating it, still till today. I really wonder if it's possible, but I don't think it's a fight that we shouldn't uptake. But I also think, like I said before, we should support the right initiatives. So there is, for example, the Free Black University initiative in the UK that is being established. There are also initiatives for the pluriversity. So a university that is not based on one kind of knowledge, but on multiple types of knowledge, like the pluriverse that Esther also mentioned, which I think are really initiatives that we should support.
Thank you, yes. Last one?
Yeah, but I wanted to make a remark because just now it was mentioned about the COP that happened recently. There is someone here who went there for the islands. I don't know if you want to give that person a chance to speak or go to a question. Which of the two?
How are you on time?
Yeah.
Maybe brief?
Okay,
briefly?
Brief, very short.
Oh my God, what do you want me to say?
you want to say something? Oh. If not, we go to a question. You want to say something?
Like briefly.
Two things actually that I heard. The first one was of the miss who asked about what yeah?
Yes.
Aye. About the miss who asked about the funding of the European Union to make it more independent. Bonaire is actually an overseas country territory, so we're indirectly part of the European Union. So basically, we can use funds to combat climate change, but the thing is, we don't have sufficient knowledge to write project plans and stuff like that, and our relationship with The Hague isn't good, so our relationship with the European Union isn't also good or non-existent, so it's a bit troublesome, but that's also a possibility. And regarding the COP, I was there after fighting years and years and years to get a chance to go there. What Sherman was saying is that basically, as Bonaire, we're part of the Netherlands, but they don't count us as part of the Netherlands. So what the Netherlands do actually, whenever they go somewhere, they have to talk on behalf of us all. So they go to the COP and they say, we want to combat climate change, but they forget that they have an island, 7,000 kilometers, so there's going underwater. And there they are at the COP, giving out monies to other islands who are going underwater while we're suffering. So it's really weird. But anyways, so, but I was there trying to give attention to the islands. The Netherlands didn't appreciate that much, but I did my best. Basically, since Greenpeace came up with the research and put pressure, you see a lot of actions going with the ministries. In a couple of weeks ago, I think Greenpeace did a WOP-verzoek to get some documents to see what are the plans of the government actually when it comes to Bonaire. And you can actually see in the documents that civil servants are saying to each other, don't give it too much money. If it costs too much money, don't do it. So that's the whole reason why we didn't have any attention for climate change. And now that Greenpeace said, okay, you know what, we're going to make a case out of it, and that's where all the actions are coming from. So to answer the other question about the miss who asked if it's a show or not, basically yes. But yeah, with Greenpeace, we're trying to see how serious we can get them to be. So yeah.
Thank you, yes. I think that's also a nice way to wrap it up, and for the sake of time, and I have only one job to keep track of time, so I just need to stick to my job here. So I think with that, we're going to land this plane, and if you still have questions, please, there is some time to continue the conversation downstairs in the bar. So please hold your thoughts and keep them with you. And for now, I want to thank this panel so much. Thank you so much, Sheila, Shermer, and Esther as well. And also, Esther, thank you for still joining us online. But before we wrap it up, before we finish this evening, we have a final intermezzo, and this will be another artistic, let's say, intervention. Genial Holder will recite a poem that is inspired by the topics and the kind of contributions that we've heard throughout this evening. So an artist and energy transmuter. There we go. Without further ado, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Hi. Mic check? Yes. Before I start, I'd like to just take one moment to get comfortable. That's the one moment. And secondly, I know I'm not working for Greenpeace or anything, but I really want to thank Greenpeace for making this happen. But also for the audience, because usually you don't have that many white people in a space like this discussing these topics. So thank you for being here. Really. Yeah? All right. So my task today was indeed taking bits of pieces of what we've been discussing, the conversations, the questions, and integrating that into an artistic piece. So without further ado, I'm going to share with you same storm, different boats. Same storm, different boats. When the next wave appears, I wonder how we will deal. I wonder if we'll get to heal, because this is real. Yeah, this is a big deal. This asks for you to feel the fear of the next disaster that is unpredictable, unforeseeable, but yet ever so near, as unpredictable as the next meal for some of us. Will we need to heal? Please hear our appeal, same storm, different boats. Everything is connected, yet our condition is ever so distant. Colonialism has affected our history and who we are today. Climate racism will affect our very existence and will make our future ever more uncertain. Everything is connected, yet we beg to be heard over and over again. Over and over again. Sign our petition, treat us fairly, give us funds, listen to the ringing bells of something we can no longer control nor conceal. I wonder if we'll get your attention. I hope for some compassion for our situations. You can help from your position, privileged and rich because of your afforded ambitions while depriving some populations for some attention as you give others all the coverage. Makes me think of how some Europeans reacted to the flood in Germany in 2021 and the recent heat waves and the damage they brought with them. I remember how these natural catastrophes disrupted bubbles, broke through privilege, got people crying, saying, "This doesn't happen here." Showing how ever safe they feel, showing how our suffering is never near, showing how comfortably aware some tend to live, aware of the pain that others experience and are subjected to, yet because it's never really here, it's never really near, it won't make you shed a tear. Same storm, different boats. Will you get to feel our fear, even if it's not in your proximity? Will you get to sense our concerns, even as they don't affect you immediately? Will you do what you can do to avoid a disastrous collision, man versus nature? You know what's bound to happen. Will you invest some resources to avoid a fatal blow? Hear me out as I tell you this. World climate is asking for a change. Will you change your ways, or will you discriminate against and dismiss our case? Climate justice implies willingness to do what's just and right, not merely defending your interests, not only protecting your kind. Same storm, different boats. Power dynamics are the mechanics. Money matters. Our lives? Let them scatter. Profit, 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 profit. Your greed to nefariously make money will be the burden that we will have to carry. Fossil fuels fueling your system, carbon emissions, depleting conditions, make the money rains as sea levels rise, continue to stash your cash as coral reefs begin to crash. More people will keep getting sick as your wallets keep getting thick. Pollution with no resolution in your constitution, no resolution towards a revolution from your institution. Profit, 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 profit. Profiting of the lives and suffering of others, profiting of lands that was never given to you, yet you decided to make yours and extract all you wanted out of them until they were left naked, poor, depleted to their core. Greenwashing, buying carbon credit, hiring PR firms to paint your interest as seemingly aligned where current needs. Play pretend to care as you look away. Show the world what it wants to see. Sustainability goals, but only as long as they're sustaining your ability to make profit, 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 profit. Extreme weather cases, the next Harvey or Irma is not too far. Will you for once attempt to ensure proper precautions before damage comes? Or is it going to be another We Are the World international charity event? Putting the burden of your inaction on the people, letting common folk pick up the pieces while you sponsor war with billions and trillions. Is it gonna be a truthful, we are in this together this time? With the responsibility that comes with such statement? Or we send our thoughts and prayers again, with the detachment that such word imply? Excuse my cynicism. I have no incentives to believe in your willingness to do better, even as I ask you for your understanding and hope for a better outcome than my current realism. Now it's time to decide. Decide to do better. Better than your historically feeble attempts to show solidarity. Decide to do better than what you're known for. Decide to include us too in your definition of humanity. Not a distant cost to help from afar. Not a charity case to assist when disaster arrives. I'm telling you to hear our appeal. Because let's be fair. Your contribution to the global challenge we now face, your implication in the crisis of our time, your influence in our lack of resourcefulness is as big as your unwillingness to compensate for your participation in the extensive capitalization of natural resources and contribution to structural oppression and so much aggression on the face of the earth. It's as big as your lack of understanding of our need for restoration and restitution. As it stands, we will have to bear the consequences once again of your actions, your exploitation, subjectification, and objectification of Mother Nature, your carelessness towards the planet, your desire to amass at the expense of another, your need to accumulate while not really caring about how the collateral damage will affect others, your incessant urge to supposedly progress while simultaneously and ironically you regress from your connection to the earth and its most vulnerable people and populations. We are in the same storm, and the issue will affect all of us. The only difference is that your boat can take the next wave, yours can handle the next blow, while ours is one blow away from a hole which we cannot recover.